Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for Getting Started with Threat Modeling, Lessons We Learned. Have you heard about software threat modeling and now you want to know more? Or has your organization said you need to start threat modeling your applications, but you aren't too sure where to start? Or maybe you've tried threat modeling in the past, but you gave up because it was too manual and too time consuming. When it comes to software application threat modeling, Security Compass senior solution engineers Kevin Delaney and Adrian Theral have pretty much seen and heard it all. Today, Kevin and Adrian will share threat modeling lessons our customers have learned over the past several years as they've helped our customers design and implement software threat modeling programs at scale within their own organizations. So as we begin today, let's quickly go through just a couple of housekeeping items. So first of all, you'll receive an email with a link to the slides and a recording of this webinar after today's event. Also, please ask questions. To ask a question, type your questions in the comment box or send an email to insights@securitycompass.com. We'll respond to your questions via email after the webinar ends today. And also just note that the way the comment box looks may vary a little bit based on your platform and whether you're using LinkedIn or YouTube or Twitter to join us for today. So now we'll move on and introduce our speakers. So I'm Moren Shaala, and I'm the Director of Product Marketing here at Security Compass, based in Houston, Texas. And our experts with me here today are Kevin Delaney and Adrian Theral. Kevin, I'll start with Kevin, is a passionate technical sales leader with over 15 years of experience helping buyers navigate and understand complex technology. Kevin is an accomplished presenter and speaker, and he frequently appears on podcasts, television, and other media outlets to discuss current information security events and where Security Compass fits in the market. And Kevin is coming to us today from Austin, Texas. Adrian is a senior solutions engineer based in Vancouver, British Columbia. Adrian is a seasoned application security engineer with 8 years of experience in cloud services, static and dynamic analysis, and telecommunications, who joined us here at Security Compass last year. And like a predictable Pacific Northwest resident, you can usually find Adrian at his local coffee shop. So in our session today, first I'll spend a minute or two talking just to make sure we're all on the same page about what we mean when we talk about software threat modeling. Then we'll dig a little bit into why you need to care now, today, about software threat modeling. And finally, after this level set, we'll spend the rest of our time here today having Kevin and Adrian share what you need to know about software threat modeling if you're just getting started, based on some of the important lessons they've learned by working with multiple organizations who've implemented threat modeling over the last couple of years. So with that, let's first start off and talk just for a minute about what threat modeling is. So according to the Open Web Application Security Project, or more familiarly known as OWASP, OWASP is a nonprofit foundation that works to improve software security and threat modeling and works on ways to identify, communicate, and understand threats and mitigations within the context of protecting something of value. When we think about a threat model, and according to OWASP, a threat model is a structured representation of all of the information that affects the security of an application. So in essence, it's a view of the application and its environment through the lens of security. Of course, threat modeling can be applied to a wide range of things like software applications and systems and networks and distributed systems and Internet of Things and IoT devices and business processes. But for the purpose of our discussion today, we're really just going to focus on software or application threat modeling. So now that we've narrowed our focus down from the more general types of threat modeling, such as network threat modeling, right on down to software or application threat modeling, let's take a moment and really focus in on what software or application threat modeling is. So most people in the field of software or application threat modeling first tend to think of the Threat Modeling Manifesto, which was written by some of the world's best thought leaders on threat modeling and serves as the industry's North Star on the topic. According to the Threat Modeling Manifesto, threat modeling is analyzing representations of a system to highlight concerns about security and privacy characteristics. And at its highest level, it asks 4 main questions. 1, what are we working on? 2, what can go wrong? 3, what are we going to do about it? And 4, did we do a good enough job? So, in other words, it's trying to understand all of the potential avenues an attacker could use to compromise an asset and producing an appropriate set of countermeasures that could be implemented as a result. So now, when most people talk about software or application threat modeling, the first thing that tends to come to mind is a diagram. So, for example, in the golden oldie pre-COVID days, back when people still worked in offices, people would get together in conference rooms and use a whiteboard to threat model. Then they might take a picture and translate it into a digital format using something like what you see here, Draw.io. Or maybe they use one of the old free tools to try and draw their threat modeling diagram, something like you see here, which is the Microsoft threat modeling tool. Or maybe they have a few more years of experience under their belt and they're using a more automated and advanced commercial software threat modeling solution like the one you see here. But now that we've done a bit of a level set on what threat modeling is and covered a couple of the different approaches to threat modeling, let's talk for just a moment about why organizations need to threat model. So, software teams today are being asked to release software faster than ever before while still ensuring that the software they release meets an ever-increasing number of security and compliance requirements. So, increasing cyber crimes and hacking has led governments and industries to introduce new regulations that emphasize secure design. Increased adoption of new technology and a shortage of experienced security practitioners is escalating costs to secure critical systems and infrastructure. And rapidly changing technology is continually introducing new vulnerabilities, which results in a really steep learning curve to try and stay up to date. And last, but certainly not least, product teams are spending more time on security and compliance requirements, which means less time on features that drive growth, making it hard to stay competitive. So, organizations also threat model due to the very real and tangible benefits threat modeling provides. Threat modeling helps them release secure code faster by automating and identifying and prioritizing software threats. It helps them enforce consistent security controls across multiple teams. It reduces the risk of insecure design by empowering developers, and it helps teams continuously improve the security of their software every release. So now we know a little bit about what threat modeling is and its benefits, but really, why should you care? So, according to the State of Threat Modeling, which was a research survey conducted by Golfdale Consulting, an independent third-party research firm, almost 80% of respondents said that threat modeling was a top priority. 58% of respondents said that they typically do threat modeling every release, and 71% said that they thought the amount of threat modeling they were doing would continue to grow. So what you can see from the results of this survey is that if you aren't already threat modeling your software by the end of this year, it's probably coming your way very, very soon. And why is it coming your way? Well, as we've seen in the last year or two, there's been a significant increase in regulatory focus on threat modeling. So, for example, in 2021, in response to the US President's executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity, which is also, typically referred to as EO 1428, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, published recommended minimum standards for vendor and developer verification of code. And in this document, it lists threat modeling as the first of 6 recommended techniques for verification of code by developers. NIST also issued guidance on mitigating the risk of software vulnerabilities by adopting Secure Software Development Framework, or what we typically call the SSDF. And the Secure Software Development Framework really recommends threat modeling to help design software to meet security requirements and mitigate security risks. And it's also important to note that according to guidance published by the Office of Management and Budget in 2022, US agencies are required to start collecting attestation letters from software vendors for critical software by June 2023 and for all software by September 2023, dates which are coming up to us pretty rapidly. And last but not least, if you are either an application security professional or a software developer, you need to care because security resources are scarce across all organizations. As a general rule of thumb, in most organizations, the ratio of application security professionals to cybersecurity professionals is at least 100 to 1. And in fact, the BSIM 13 report, published by Synopsys in 2022, found that on average, there is one security resource for every 122 developers and 43 applications. So as you can see, the ratios are working against cybersecurity professionals. Developers are being asked to take on more responsibilities and a more active role in threat modeling. And if you haven't seen this in your organization already, buckle up. It's coming your way, and it's probably coming much sooner than you may realize. So now that we've talked about what software or application threat modeling is and why organizations do it and why you should care, I'm going to turn things over to Kevin and Adrian, and they're going to share with you some threat modeling lessons our customers have learned as they've designed their own software threat modeling programs. So hopefully these lessons from Kevin and Adrian will help you as you look to start a threat modeling program in your own organization. Or if you already have a threat modeling program, they'll help you focus on improving and scaling the program that you already have in place. So with that, I think I'm going to turn things over to Kevin here and let him get started with our first lesson learned. So over to you, Kevin.
Thanks, Maureen. Awesome intro. So the first lesson that I think we've observed in all the customers that we've worked with over the years, I'd say would start with identify your objectives. So everybody comes out with intentions of wanting to be as secure as possible. They want to be as rigorous as possible on every single application, regardless of the resources that they have. And they kind of take this all or nothing approach to how they'd approach we're starting to work with modeling software threats. We've spoken to organizations that have hundreds or thousands of applications. And when we talk to some of them about, okay, let's say you have 500 applications. How many did you actually complete threat models on last year? And they say, well, 20. Well, why did you only get to 20 threat models? Well, because they have this all or nothing approach, that they have this very heavyweight and rigorous process that they don't adjust their approach based on the relative risk level of that application or that piece of technology that they're working with. So going into it with a good understanding of what you're trying to do and why, what are you realistically trying to protect? What would be the worst case scenario if there were to be a vulnerability in this piece of software, and taking a kind of risk adjusted approach to how you threat model those applications is really important. I hate to use the term boiling the ocean, but we see a lot of organizations try to boil the ocean with threat modeling, and that's why a lot of it just doesn't get done. And it's also just seen as this manual Herculean effort, that there's a lot of different ways to approach it. And we see organizations that leverage automation be much more successful when they kind of know what their objectives are and why they're doing it.
Yeah, and Kevin, it reminds me of some of the conversations we've had. People who may have tried threat modeling many years ago don't realize how automated and how many solutions are out there now. And we kind of joke, it's not your mother's threat modeling.
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, and it doesn't have to be something that is only centered on a small group of like subject matter experts and individuals. It's something that can very easily become the part of the roles and responsibilities of engineering teams, and getting everybody thinking about a culture of security in the software that they build and deploy.
All right, are we ready to move on to the next lesson?
I think so, yeah.
All right, lesson number 2. I think Adrian, you're going to take the lead on this one.
Yeah, exactly. So thinking beyond that pretty diagram. So, as architects, and especially as security architects and security professionals, we deal with diagrams quite often to try and visualize and understand what's happening, what's going on. And it's tough because there's not always a lot of context within those diagrams. It's a fine balance between making something that is visually representative of what's going on versus something that a human can quickly understand and be able to interpret. When I worked in the static analysis field, our diagrams, when you break down an application into its various, sinks and sources, its various layers, the various, data flows that happen, it's really cumbersome and complex. And you kind of need a microscope to be able to really understand what's going on within some of those diagrams. And of course, those can't be human readable. And this is where, from a lot of threat models, we try and abstract that, bring into scope some of those bigger pieces and components. But it's still really tough because the diagram itself is not a be all end all. We want to get towards something actionable that developers, DevOps engineers can actually take, be able to grasp and do something with. Having that picture is amazing, but it's not sufficient to actually outline, hey, these are all the threats that are available, and then also what do I need to do about those threats. As you can kind of imagine, with a very few number of application security professionals, with a ton of developers, a ton of DevOps engineers at the actual application, trying to build things, there's a lot going on, and being able to empower those folks is really important. And, forcing those folks to come back to a diagram time and time again to try and derive context and an understanding of what's going on is really difficult. And what kind of sucks about diagrams fairly often is that they're not usually maintained. There might be an amazing whiteboarding session that a team might go through at the onset of a project, or even the onset of a brand new product or service, but that rarely gets updated. That rarely gets kept up to date with the minute changes that happen from an architectural perspective, and even from a development perspective, as that application or project or service turns from that conceptual phase into towards a piece of code or service that customers can actually take advantage of. And so we've got to really stretch beyond just that diagram. We've got to move in towards a stage with threat modeling where we're really starting to track mitigations and countermeasures, things that are actually tangible for developers, DevOps engineers, and being able to ensure that those have been completed. And going back to what we kind of chatted about earlier on within the webinar, when we have to present that attestation for either federal government department that we're working with, or a potential and large enterprise customer, it's difficult to just give that diagram and not necessarily show the context and show the flow of activity that's happened beyond that diagram and towards the mitigations that have happened and what that current state looks like. As a CISO or even as a VP of application development tries to look at their portfolio to understand where some of those risks are, having just those diagrams is not going to be sufficient. It's going to cause folks to have a ton of time to have to spend on all of that. So they need to have a really quick representation of what's going on. And that can only happen if we are able to translate from those diagrams into something that's actually actionable.
All right. Anything to add, Kevin, before we move on to lesson number 3?
No, I think that actually flows pretty nicely into lesson number 3, because actionability really does start with the developer at the end of the day. When you are identifying threats and you have a bunch of security experts, security architects are in the room that are working with developers to understand the context of their application and the potential threats and weaknesses that could exist, a lot of it seems to be very focused on making sure we have an understanding of what the threats are, which is super important. Like, you have to have that, and that has to be documented from release to release. But the most important part is making sure that when we're actually implementing mitigations, the people that are responsible for writing the code know exactly what they have to do. And when developers are not security experts, or at least most of them aren't, most of the developers that we speak to are not coming out of school or even work experience with a ton of security domain knowledge, they cannot be left to their own devices to go to Stack Overflow, or I guess today like ChatGPT, to figure out how to properly secure the application in the context that they're currently working in, or in whatever new programming language or framework they might be leveraging. We really have to be more prescriptive with developers on how to make sure that mitigations and controls get implemented properly. The other way that we focus or center on the developer is by acknowledging kind of that eye chart that you put up before, where you have like 100 developers to one security architect. And frankly, I even think that's probably optimistic from a lot of customers that we've spoken to. You need to acknowledge that there's only so many security architects and there's always going to be more engineers. So when you acknowledge that they're not security experts, but with proper tooling and a little bit of training, developers can take the thing that they're really good at, which is understanding their project and the context of the application that they're building, and combine that with automation tooling that's able to kind of extend the reach and scale of your security architects. That frees up those folks for work that is a lot less suitable for automation. So by centering on the developer and empowering them, you use them as your scaling lever. That's the thing that you have a lot of is developers generally. And that is how we see most organizations really kind of start to turbocharge and scale threat modeling and getting to those apps that they would just have frankly never been able to touch before.
All right. Great. Thanks, Kevin. And just keeping an eye on time and keeping things moving along, let's go ahead and tackle lesson number 4 here. It isn't one and done. So what exactly does that mean here?
Exactly. Yeah, no, it's not one and done. It's not just, doing it at the onset. A lot of threat models happen at the very beginning, at that design phase, but they rarely get updated throughout the whole process and process of development, and as well as even as technologies change, right? So you might have a threat model that you've conducted 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and there might be some technological changes that have introduced some really drastic new threats that require really intricate attention and really fast attention as well, right? And so having that threat model being archaic and from that initial phase, you're not able to take advantage of some of the changes that you've made throughout your development process. Maybe, you might have a huge threat around authorization or authentication, and you've been able to implement some really cool new services or APIs to be able to take advantage of that threat. And so if you don't actually bring that into scope for your threat model, then it forces teams to run into towards a ton of rabbit holes where they're just diving super deep onto something that isn't relevant, that isn't actually applicable, and it all stems from this threat model not being up to date and not being maintained over time. And I get it, it's tough, when we think about threat models from a diagrammatic perspective, and even from the onerous amount of attention that security folks will spend on some of those threat models. It's tough to be able to do that time and time again, to do that on a weekly basis for each application, especially if they have, that 42 applications on average that they have to think about. It's tough to be able to go in and level set those threat models each and every week, each and every release, even each and every quarter, year. It's tough, like with a lot of those projects that are happening, and that's where there is a need to be able to move threat modeling in towards a more automated fashion, so that both developers can come in to be able to quickly make changes, as well as being able to tap into what's actually happening within your software development lifecycle and through the various components that you might be introducing through that as well. So, if there are new components that have been introduced to take advantage of threats, maybe across your whole application portfolio, it's tough to evangelize some of those. And this is where, through the threat model and being able to have a more automated form of that, you're able to figure out some of those ideal candidates for from a project perspective or a service perspective that could really benefit from this brand new service that you're introducing to mitigate certain threats. And a classic example of that is around cryptography and key management. That is ever evolving, and within an organization, it's difficult to go back to a lot of your legacy apps and be able to change those and modify them. But there might be some really cool candidates that exist, and being able to have a up-to-date threat model will allow you to identify those ideal candidates easier and be able to start putting together those plans. And so, yeah, threat modeling is not a one and done. It shouldn't be there collecting dust. I remember the days of having binders of security policies dropped onto my desk, and if that's the case, even printing your threat model, it's probably going to be archaic by that point, right? So we want to ensure that those threat models are constantly kept up to date, and the only way to do that is through some more automated fashion. Kevin, was there anything else that you'd like to add on this one?
No, again, it just like feeds right into the next one. It's almost like we set this up. With lesson 5 being automate to scale. And I think we've already kind of covered this in a number of ways where continuing to focus a manual approach or doing your manual approach faster is not how you're going to scale. Cutting corners on a manual approach is not how you're going to scale. Automation and, again, leveraging the thing that you have a lot of, which is developers, is really the only way that we see most organizations start to scale threat modeling into hundreds or thousands of applications. It's really the only way you can do it. Everybody's heard about the security talent crunch. People are constantly moving organizations. It's hard to retain security folks. It's hard to hire good ones. It's very, very difficult to have enough people to keep up with the size of this problem. And when you have competing interests from the business wanting to make sure that you are getting features out the door and you are staying competitive and you are releasing software as fast as possible, or you move to like a DevOps CI/CD model where you're releasing all the time, the needs of security need to keep pace with the business, and a manual approach just doesn't do that, unfortunately. If we had all the security architects in the world, it could, but that's just not reality, unfortunately. So automating to scale is really one of the most important takeaways.
All right, thanks, Kevin. And we'll move on to lesson number 6. It feels like we're back in middle school or high school math. Be prepared to show your work.
Yeah, exactly. Just like long division, right? Where if you put the answer to the long division question that's at hand, at the top, you might or might not get all the marks, right? And I think that's the case when it comes towards application security as well, especially when federal departments and large enterprises are trying to dive deep to understand the activity that you've performed. A lot of organizations are trying to really better understand that whole supply chain from a software perspective. And that's where, if you are an organization that's producing a service or a product from a software perspective for your customers to consume, they've got to dive deep to be able to understand the security implications of using your tools and of using your services as well. And so this is where showing your homework is really, really crucial. Not only having those intricate certifications that you might obtain for your software, but also being able to have all of the methodology and the actual activities that both developers, DevOps folks have performed throughout the lifecycle of the product, even during development and even post during the operations and the monitoring of particular applications as well. So this is where, showing your homework and showing your work is really crucial to being able to not only secure new customers and access new markets, but also being able to retain some of your existing customers as well, especially as that crunch comes. A great example is even within medical devices, with the FDA really calling for a more robust security with those medical devices that are going to be connected towards the internet, that have the capability of potentially causing harm to someone's life through that connectivity. And so not being able to show your deep level of methodology and work that you've done becomes really difficult, because the FDA will now have that as a mechanism to be able to take your product or service off the market. And of course, that's really tough, because that means that your revenue goes right down to $0, and no one wants that. And I think, going back towards what some of our earlier threat modeling guidance, we want to be able to understand our objective. And one of the biggest things is to ensure that we're not impacting revenue revenue, either through brand damage or even through regulations taking our product off the market. So it's definitely a tough world. And yeah, definitely going back towards middle school and grade school, where you can't just pop that answer at the top of your question there. You need to really show all of that work that you've done to derive that answer as well.
All right. And anything to add, Kevin, before we head into our final lesson here?
Nope, that covered it well. Lesson number 7: free isn't always free. There's a lot of free tools out there, and there's great free tools out there that do what they say on the tin very well. When you think about how these tools are designed and who they're designed for, I mean, you already mentioned one of them, like Microsoft Threat Modeling Tool, for example. That has been a pillar of the threat modeling community, still is, for practitioners that are looking for something to help with their manual work. What that is not is automation, unfortunately. That is something that is going to help people that are currently performing manual work do so faster, or they might be able to produce a higher quality output, just because the tools are designed to help them do their job. But the costs of that, in terms of the actual work that has to come out the other end, when you're not giving developers very prescriptive guidance, or you're the one responsible for maintaining content and regulatory mappings and things like that. There's a lot of things to consider when you're using software that don't exactly present themselves right on the initial sticker price when you're first getting started. Definitely lots of good free tools out there that suit a purpose for one person or a small team to do their work differently or better in a silo. But when we think about a threat modeling program and how much threat modeling touches every aspect of the modern business, you really need to think to something that is going to be much better suited for like transforming an organization, like transforming and creating the kind of change that is really needed for threat modeling in order to be able to keep up with the business. And you really need, like, that's a full-time job for a lot of people. It's not a passion project. Like there's a reason that there's a whole market segment for this, and that's because there's a defined need for organizations to have a trusted partner that helps them keep up with threats and weaknesses, what they do about them, how those map to satisfying the ever-changing regulation landscape. There really is no comparison when you look at commercial solutions versus free. Definitely, if you're just kind of getting started, it's definitely a low risk way to kind of get your feet wet. But when your organization is really ready to kind of roll something out and scale, it really is no question. I think that's the other thing that we've just learned. We've spoken to customers that said, "Man, I wish I heard about you guys earlier," or I wish I knew about you guys when I was at my last company, for example, because they've just kind of like bashed their head into the wall, not really knowing that commercial solutions are out there. So yeah, that's I think that's kind of the core of the lessons. I think that's most of what we've heard from customers that we've spoken to over the years. I don't know if Adrian, if there's anything you'd add to that.
I think the one last thing to add is the difficulty in finding folks to do threat modeling. So I was actually just chatting with a customer based out of the Western United States who tried to hire some folks out of Sweden to be able to do threat modeling. And it's just, there's a huge crunch in the market where there aren't that many folks that are able to perform this activity. And, that's the other big thing that's at play, where ideally through some of the commercial tools that are available, folks can be able to get over that hurdle and be able to still take advantage of all the benefits that threat modeling has to offer without necessarily having to, dig through that job market to find folks, because they are really difficult to find. So last thing to add there.
Right. Well, great. Well, thanks very much to Kevin and Adrian for giving us a quick download on some lessons learned based on your work in the threat modeling field over the past several years. And Also, as a reminder, if you do have any additional questions, feel free to email us at insights@securitycompass.com. One of our experts will be more than happy to answer any additional questions that you have. And also, in terms of next steps, you can also learn more about software threat modeling by just reaching out and asking to speak with one of our Security Compass experts. Our team's more than happy, I'll say it again, to answer any questions you have about getting started in your program. Or maybe if you're one of those folks who's already doing threat modeling, more than happy to talk with you about how you can further automate and improve, and in particular, as Kevin touched on, scale your program. Also, you can always learn more by going to our website. If you go to the link displayed here on this slide, you can learn more about threat modeling by looking at some of our resources. We've got some case studies out there, some explainer videos, some really good demo videos and white papers and research reports. And all of these are really designed to help you understand how to scalably model software threats and to deliver secure, compliant code quickly. So again, thanks to all of you for joining us today to hear more from Kevin and Adrian about some important lessons learned over the past several years as they work with our customers to design and implement software threat modeling programs at scale. Thanks one last time to Kevin and Adrian for hopping on today and sharing your expertise. And this concludes our webinar for today.
Thanks, Maureen.